Sometimes I get the impression that the first like second or something of what I do gets cut off, and I can't tell. So now that we're past the part where we're getting cut off by somebody, here's the beginning of the stream. Today we're going to work on this project file system upgrades some more. Since my last stream, I finished the parser completely, debugged it, got everything up and running with the parser. I switched the config file system and the theme file system and the project file system all over to the new config system and deleted out all the old config stuff. So I did a deep reorganization of all three of those systems to fully rely on the new parser, and then I scrapped the old config parsing thing. The advantage to this new parser is that, well, the disadvantage to the other one was that it was sort of an iterative thing. You would call begin procedure, and then it would like initialize some stuff, and then you would like consume a little bit and then use it, and consume a little bit and use it. And that has some downsides. The upside to it is that you don't have to consume it all at once and then like query the resulting data structure that you built. But that's not really a very useful upside. It turns out it's just easier to sort of separate things out into separate data transformations. So do one full transformation from text to a parsed format, and then do another transformation from your parsed format into the structure that you're filling, rather than trying to build it as an iterative process with an API that you call to, so that you can glue it all together, because that API that iterates a little bit forward and a little bit forward, it prevents you from doing things like having lots of, suppose I'm in my project file and I want to eventually get to the point where I can just say something like, okay, I'm going to have my build debug, and then I'm going to say, okay, build debug is going to be something that I just declared right here, and you know, the way we do that is build.bat. We output the changes to compilation. We footer panel, we use that, and save dirty files, we use that too, right? So I could rewrite the parser to handle this, but then if I wanted to do something like, okay, so I save that up there, and then I set this to build debug win32 or something, right? If I called this that, right? This was pretty hard to make work because it doesn't, it's already parsed this, but if I put this here, what happens now, and so on and so on. So the old project system just was too weak. It was too much like a I don't know how else to put it besides it was sort of trying to optimize unimportant things, and in the process made certain like flexibility things more difficult than they should have been. So now I have a thing that just automatically can handle that, and so the new formats we build soon for the new system will be able to take advantage of that kind of thing, which will be very useful. But since it's also all centralized around this parse once, pass, and then interpret the data into whatever context is appropriate sort of setup, it means that all of my parsing error stuff, which used to be scattered to be special for each one of the like different types of files, like a config file, a theme file, and a project file, the error reporting was specialized to each one. Now that doesn't have to be the case because they're all flowing through the same grammar that's all being parsed in exactly the same way, and in that parse, that whole parse is happening in one phase, and so errors can be accumulated and printed all at once at the end of that phase instead of having to be little like dropped out bit by bit, and the recovery system can be smarter too. Where by recovery I mean we want the kind of parser where we always accept the string if we can, and we just ignore the errors rather than refusing to move forward. That way, if someone has an error in their configuration file, it doesn't like totally not work, it just only kind of doesn't work, and then they can get that fixed hopefully because they need their text editor to fix their config file, so the more that their config still works, the better. Let me catch up with the chat real quick. Affiliated Delsky, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, yes, alt period does, like alt comma will close that panel, and that'll open it. I'm not sure, control period isn't anything, I don't think, control panel is switch panel. Oh, are we talking about the bindings? Let's take a look. Yeah, right here, alt period. If the special build panel is open, makes the build panel the active panel. Are you looking at the Mac version? If you're looking under Mac, then yeah. Yeah, these have to be different because the Mac keyboard uses different modifiers. Don't worry about it. It's confusing. I wish I knew a better way to deal with that shit that Apple creates with that stupid thing, but whatever. I mean, it's not just that they use command. A lot of people who haven't looked at it too closely get this confused. It's not just that they use command instead of a Windows key. They use command the way Windows uses control, and then they also put a bunch of uses, like they put alt and control in opposite locations, so your thumb has to bend into bad ways to use the control key on a Mac if you try to use it the same way you use control on a Windows, because their control key is positioned where you want the alt, so just everything has to be different. Anyway, point is, we're going to work on this error reporting stuff. I see. So what we want to do is, first of all, in order to do, let me look at the stream to do here, just to make sure I've walked you through what we're going to do. We're going to do error reporting first, and then parse recovery. They're kind of going to come up together. Basically, what it's going to be is anytime, I'm going to go through the parser code, and anytime I see a require statement, I'm going to, or a return 0 statement, I'm going to convert that into report an error and recover from the error. And the way, by the way, what a require statement is I just have a macro that basically says if this evaluates to 0, then return 0. So all of my procedures then have to return something that, return a type that when you return 0 is type checks correctly. So like pointers are the normal thing, like everything returns a pointer, as you can see right here, right? And since everything returns a pointer, whenever I return 0, I'm just returning a null pointer. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically say this should never ever happen. Or if it can happen, but it should never happen from the root. Like, maybe assignment sometimes needs to return 0 because it's just like, I have no idea, I did not get the information I needed to build an assignment. And so even though we were supposed to parse an assignment, we actually return 0. But at this root here, we should never return 0. And if we receive return 0s from other people, we should try to recover from those, and so on and so on. So that's recovery. But we also want to think about how we're going to report errors. And one thing I could do is just pass my applications pointer down through this entire thing. Like just add, if I do this real quick, if I just add across all these the app pointer, right, applications links. If I did that, then I could just report an error anytime it happened by printing straight out to that. The problem with that, I mean, there's a number of problems with it. The worst is that it's a bunch of separate edits, which makes it slower than it needs to be. But it's not necessarily true that every time I parse I want to print it to the same place. I might want to have the flexibility to treat those errors as just a stream of data that I do whatever I want with. So, instead of that, we're going to, inside of our config parser, we're going to add an output stream of some kind, okay? So now how do we want to do an output stream? Well, I already have my main arena here where I'm filling in the data like the nodes of the parsed data, and I don't want to mix these. I don't want to have basically my error stream. I want it to be a contiguous chunk of memory that grows over time, whereas these are like linked lists. So if I drew a picture of it, it's like right. So if you think of an arena as just like this long chunk of memory that you're grabbing pieces out from, my parser basically will go, okay, I need a node, and it grabs one, and then it goes, oh, I need another node, and it grabs one, and all the while it maybe stores pointers to these things from a stack, and then later maybe it grabs a node here, and then it doesn't need those pointers, so it grabs a node here that's like, okay, this node now contains the pointers back to these two things, and these guys are now in a linked list to each other because they're both children of this or whatever. And then it just keeps going. It might throw in some stuff that doesn't actually get linked back in as it goes. This can happen for reasons like maybe this is a string, so it's not actually a node, and this just uses that as its string space, and so on and so on. And these we have no idea how much memory we're getting used, and we're basically just using it as an allocator. And the idea is once we're done, all of this memory is on an arena that is one block that fully contains the parse thing, and yeah, it's got links and lists and trees everywhere, but it's all sort of within this one chunk of data, which gives us a lot of advantages. We can feed it all at once. If we serialize it, it's within a known blocked size. We don't have to do some kind of pointer hashing. We can just take the base and take the offset from the base if we want, and so on. So that's how I allocate nodes when I parse the data. But when I'm making my error stream, I want the error stream to come out as one long string, right? Multiple lines on it with maybe different errors that have nothing to do with each other, but I want just one single string, I think, because then I can post that as a single edit very easily. Now, if you're thinking, well, why wouldn't you do something different, like an array of the errors or something? I could do something like that. You know, maybe a linked list of each error, but then so what I could do is say that actually in this block I do allocate the errors too, and there's like a linked list of these things called errors that we have a pointer to the first error here, and here's what an error node is, and it's got like some text that it's with it, and then that points to the next error node over here, and so on. And then when we want to print it, we just we do another pass that takes those and pushes onto the arena a big string that is the allocation of all of them. So we serialize the errors later. So the advantage to that is we only need one arena to go in to the parser, and that arena contains both the error data and the parse data. Some disadvantages to that are it's now going to be an extra pass's worth of work to get the contiguous version. We have to push this on too. That also means it takes more total memory, even though it takes one less arena. And it means that the nodes for the actual parse data are now more spread out because they can have errors in between them that would have normally been localized or not put in that same local block with everything else. So it's really just a judgment call, I think. And I'm leaning towards keeping it to one arena, even though it has those other costs, because I already only have one arena in all the other parts of my code, and I don't really want to go through the work right now of setting up a system where we have more arenas. So the one arena solution is attractive for that reason. It also is nice because maybe when you want to dump this, you want to dump the errors with it. You can say, here's my parse, I'm serializing it, and by the way, there were parse errors, and those can be incorporated in the serialization or not, up to you. But this way it makes it easier to incorporate them, which I think would be cool. But yeah, I think the most compelling reason to do it this way is just to avoid having to set up a two-arena solution. So all of the out errors are actually going to go right here in that memory arena, and we just need a node type for them. The can be a singly linked list with like that, and then config error first, error count, now one question is, should that actually come out with the config instead of going through the parser context thing here? Should it actually come in the output data? And I'm inclined to think that the answer to that is yes. So now it's just a part of the data format that that we're outputting here, that there can be errors. Okay. So then yeah, we'll end up wanting to make a helper for this, but let's take a look here at starting to go through and actually add error parsing, or errors printing and recovery. So what's the situation? We have, if we do not find the end of the file, try to grab an assignment. Here we're saying require that we get an assignment. Instead, what I'm going to do is say if assignment does not equal 0, then we'll push that onto our linked list of assignments that we've parsed and increase the count by 1. And that way it's not a failure case, and whatever the error is will have to be printed farther down, I guess. Alright, so when we go to parse the version here, we don't require that we get one anyway in the grammar for it to be correct. But in order to get the version correctly, it's doing these things. I think these requires are correct. If any of these are missing, then we didn't get a version correctly, and so we let's add in a semicolon on the version, actually, now that I think about it. Yep, so I'm actually okay with that being exactly the way it is. Okay. Now, an assignment is the thing we're normally parsing. So a config is optionally a version and then 0 or more assignments. So when we go to get an assignment, we try to get an L value and we try to get an R value. So if we fail to get an L value, what can we do? Well, if L does not equal 0, we should just go ahead and do this code, because that code is still correct. If L does equal 0, then I guess what we want to do is say I guess we'll say that we emit an error, expected L value, and then we'll skip ahead and return a 0. We'll skip ahead to the first time we see a semicolon. Config parser match token context cpp token semicolon. We'll do it this way. So if we match a token that's a semicolon, then we break. If we recognize token that's the end of file, then we break. Otherwise, if neither of those have happened, we just advance to the next and keep going until we find the semicolon to sort of re-center us onto something we can hopefully understand from there. Okay. And that's if we can't find an L value. Now, if we manage to match an equal sign here, we'll continue on the way we were. What happens if we don't find an equal sign? Well, what we could do is say, let's still try this. And if r does not equal 0, then we can actually do what we would have done anyway. So something like this, I guess. So if we found an equal sign or not, either way we get an r value. Do we do anything different if we did see an equal sign? You know, I guess we don't. So let's just say that actually it's just optional in reality, but it's an error if it didn't happen. So that ends up looking like that again, and that's starting to look like a pattern we might want to consider pulling out. But suppose we did get the R, then what do? Then we try to match a semicolon. If we don't match a semicolon, emit an error, expected semicolon, and then yeah, I'll allocate an assignment and return that. Okay. So this stuff down here, how do we want to deduplicate that? I have a feeling that we're going to want to do this kind of thing, well, I don't know. So if one of these, for instance, comes back as failed, L or R, it may not want to do the rebase. Maybe assignment levels where we do all of the rebasing. Which means this actually wants to do a rebase if any of those fail. Other than this one. If this one fails, we just ignore it. Okay. Okay. So yeah, let's build that one. I kind of think I don't want to do this stuff here. This trying to make it work even if we messed any part up there or there, we will just do this. And then we can really simplify this if we go if L equals 0, do this, otherwise continue normally. If we do not, if we don't match that, do that. If R is 0, so there, it's a little more complicated looking now, but the idea is pretty much the same. Get an L value, get an equal sign, get an R value, get a semicolon. Each step along the way, if we fail, we emit the appropriate error, and then we recover the parse and return 0. Yeah. That's pretty good. I like that. So then inside these, the only thing is we might want more error information. Yeah. So that starts to get kind of interesting, because for each spot where you could put an error, it's like, do I put an error here, or do I put an error inside the thing that I was calling down to, or what do I do, right? It could be that I just say the buck stops here for now, and I just put out these 4 errors, but in some cases that might not be quite expressive enough. Especially when we're parsing an R value, there's a lot of reasons it might think that, oh, that was not a good R value, like here, for instance. So I might want to at least add some extra error messages along the way too, just to make it more clear what went wrong when something goes wrong. But I think this is a good starting point. We'll get the errors working by being able to emit errors here, and then on R value and L value we can push those down further if we want. I also want to get version a little bit better. So if we see that, if we match this token, okay, so we match that token, and we match. Alright, so then if Alright, there we go. So we kind of have error recovery in there, maybe a little bit. We need to test it, of course. And we want to get these error logging things up and running. So let's write some usage code and figure out how I want this to look. I think what I want is something like this. Parenthesis open. Alright, so config parser log error, config parser context, config error equals push an array onto the context arena, one config error. I don't even have singular linked lists. So let's just make this a doubly linked list since I have the code for that, and who cares, right? Interesting, interesting. So those actually do want to live in the context, as it turns out, which means it's right here where we'll go config first error, last error, count error, and we'll set those from the context first error, last error, and count error, like that. Alright, so that lets me get my first error logged. Then I want to be able to ask to begin and end strings on the contexts arena. So that first one does there is it sets up a new empty string with a size of 0 that has a pointer to the first free character on my arena and has the capacity to fill the entire arena. So basically the entire arena has been signed over to this string, but a string that gets started that way is supposed to end by calling this, which assigns control back over to the arena. So it would be something like string.memory size equals string.size, push an array onto the context arena of exactly that size. There we go. Zen Mystic asks, so what are we working on today? Thanks for asking. I have no problem repeating this because we've been at it for a little while now. So it's how long has it been? 30 minutes, 40 minutes. All right. So we're working on upgrading the parser again. Since last time, I finished writing the full config parser system, at least the first pass of it, and then I switched all of the old stuff over to the new config thing. By old stuff I mean the old config.4coder, theme.4coder files, and project.4coder files. They all now go through the same sort of traditional parser, and since we have that situation sort of under control now, this stream has been all about we're adding error reporting and parse recovery so that if we have an error partway through, we can still extract all the data that didn't have an error and try to get as much of it as possible correct at least. We might miss one or two things every time an error happens, but for as much as possible try not to ignore all the useful data when we hit one or two parse errors, right? So that's parse recovery, and then obviously error reporting. Whenever we see an error, just give us a jump line with a short description of what went wrong so we can fix those things more quickly so that users who have like a problem in their configure file or something will know what's going on right away, right? And since it all goes through the same singular parser as a separate phase from the actual interpretation of the data in the file, it's now pretty easy to standardize an error system like this. So that's what we're doing. And once that's done, we can move on to upgrading the project system if that gets done today. Which is actually looking pretty good, like this was a pretty easy step, actually. Let's see. Oh, sorry, Jim, I forgot to answer your question from earlier. This is still on version 40X, if that's what you mean. This is still not the new engine. We're still retiring the 40X version. It's going to probably take me the rest of this year to fully transition from working on the old engine to the new one. I'm actually not doing any more new engine work until I've retired the old engine completely. So this will come out in the next build pretty soon, actually. Another week or two. Zen Mystic, yeah. So the new engine will be 4.1.x, not 4.50x. We're on 4.0.26 right now. When I upgrade, it'll be 4.10. That'll be the new engine that will be charged separately. It'll be a different project on, or a different like page on itch.io that it's paid for again once. That'll be sometime probably early 2019 when I have the buffers upgrades and the API upgrades fully ready. Dan Golf asks, "Hey Alan, what compiler do you use for each platform? Do you cross-compile?" I use a bunch of compilers. It's kind of a mess. I use GCC on Linux and on Mac. On Windows, I use two different compilers depending on which one I'm using, because the newest Windows compiler will produce errors that the older one doesn't, and so I compile on the older one here on this computer to develop, but I then, because I ship a lot of the code that I write actually gets shipped to a lot of people, I go and make sure that it compiles on the newest Visual Studio compiler, which is like, 2017 edition or whatever. So I use Visual Studio's 2013 compiler, their 2017 compiler, and GCC. And I've compiled with Clang before, but I don't do that regularly. Okay, anyways, that was a long error we just got finished writing. Let me get back on task here and write one more error. Alright, let's see what to do next. So, this isn't quite everything we want, because right now when I print an error, I don't do a few things I would need to do. Like, I'm not putting new lines at the end of these, they're all just the text of the error itself. I didn't prepend the line with the jump information. So, we want to figure out how to get that in. Now, I could just, go back through all of these and append extra stuff at the beginning and end, but I kind of think that there's another way I want to actually do that, which is this. So we have the text for the error. I'm also going to give the error a error position, and that will actually be the only other thing we need to make this work. Because then, when I when I create an error, I do all that stuff, and I will set its error position. I'll just call this position, actually, like that, and I will get that from the parser by going context data.string plus context token start. So that logs an error right where we are. And so as long as we log those errors before we recover the parse, everything is fine. Now, another thing is that this pattern here of lines is super duplicated. So we're actually going to go and change this up a little bit. So I push the error, I begin a string, and then I'm going to push the error text, and then I'm going to end the string. And so then all of these can just become config parser log error context, and then I grab the string out from right there. There we go. Yeah, man, I think it just becomes a thing where it's like there's a lot of code to get typed in, and you find ways to make it go by quicker because it actually matters. When what you're trying to do is get a lot of stuff done, you got to get a little bit faster. I don't know. I guess not everyone does it. Other people adjust other ways, right? Some people are like, I can't type fast, and so that just, or I don't like going down the road where I'm typing fast. And there's totally like low-level programmery types of positions that are like more about researching and making careful decisions, and less about getting lots of code written. But it's definitely one sort of I don't know what you want to call it, but approach or like style. It's one definite flavor of low-level programming. Definitely involves a 200 word per minute kind of thing. In fact, that's kind of why I made my own editor, was to explore ways to make it even more possible for me to type at crazy paces. So, okay. Alright, so that's good. We can now log errors and keep track of where the error occurred. And then we recover the parse and move on. At the top, yeah, okay. So that works. Let's test this out. We can test this out in a couple of ways, but the easiest way I think will be to go to, is it build config? Yeah, build config, and we're going to just try a few things. So let's start by forgetting a semicolon right here. Find out what happens. All right. There we go. Oh shit, I should probably, you know what, let me just fix something real quick. I'm working off a slightly busted version of 4coder where the indentation stuff isn't always operating like it's supposed to. So I'm gonna just fix that real quick. Gary Johansson, hey Alan, you gotten much into metaprogramming yet? Yeah, I've gotten way into metaprogramming. I don't literally metaprogram all the code I write, but I probably metaprogram once or twice a week, and I've developed a couple of different like flavors that I use depending on context and stuff, and I'm still working on it. I mean, I have a lot of opinions on what language I would like to see. It's not exactly... Yeah, it's not exactly like what other people have in mind, I guess I would say, when they talk about making a new language. But, yeah, let me just pull up an example of some of the stuff I do in my metaprogram real quick. So one-time code is a thing I've added to basically all my workstations now, which is just a side little project where I just have some code sitting around that I want to run once, and I might come back to it and edit it and run it again at some point, but this literally just printfs out stuff, right? So this is like a thing that builds all of my different what is this? Build string. Oh yeah, I had a thing that was basically like take in 3 strings and build a single string out of them, and I wanted to be able to do it for every possible combination of C putters, of C string pointers, and string structs for those 3 input parameters. So that's what, 2 to the 3, 8 different combinations. So this was just some code I wrote to spit out all that, and then I ran it and copied it in. So that's not really it's not really meta programming the way people normally think about it, but it's still code that wrote code and I just copied it in. This is pretty nice because it doesn't add time to your build setup long term, and it's just sort of throwaway and easy to get things done, a thing done quickly without going so crazy with it. The other thing I will tend to do is I will tend to have a slightly more sophisticated one that sits in my actual build system, right? But I don't, like, 4coder's a little out of hand. If I build right now, you'll see that it builds something called forwardbuild.cpp, and then it runs that. And then it builds something called FSM table generator and runs that. Then it builds forward metagen and runs that. Then it builds 4coder metadata generator and runs that. Finally, it builds these 3 things, which are actually 4coder proper, and compiles them together. Well, they don't compile together. These are different DLLs, but those are things I actually have to build. And this is 1, 2, 3, 4 meta passes, like build and parse and run, like, or build and run, build and run, build and run. And that's why the compile time for 4coder is as low as it is. I have decided in the future not to set up projects that way. So if I have a meta system, it has to be a one single application, which means I do end up building slightly more like a meta language kind of thing for those, but those tend to actually just be for like I've gone down the route before of like parsing out structs that I have marked up that are like, okay, this struct is marked up, so with a macro or something, so go ahead and parse it and make metadata for it, and that stuff works, but it's a lot of work to get it up and running, and keeping it up and running long term is just you'd really want a better language. You could also start with, like, ignore structs. I'll make my own data, and that's what I tend to do. I make my own data format that is just not a struct, and I don't bother to parse the shit in the code and then meta stuff with it. If I'm going to meta stuff, I'm just like, let me just make an easy data format that I can build myself. So if I was going to make my own programming language, it would heavily focus on data specification as its core competency, and code would just be a type of data format you can specify. Let's take a quick look at this. I'm gonna have to just let's take a look at this. So too legit to quit says yesterday John on why he hasn't switched to 4coder yet.
When am I switching to 4coder? I don't know, sometime maybe. I've just got too much real work to do right now.
Yeah, I've heard him say that a few times. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for whatever reason, the idea of John switching to 4coder is becoming more popular. I understand there was a Handmade Hero pre-stream where Casey tried out some JAI code at one point. And I've also had a couple of other hints from people that they seem to think that it's, that John's going to switch at some point soon, and I mean, I look at clips like that and all I hear is like, he's no closer than he has ever been. That sounds like what he's always said. Yeah, so here's what I would do if I was going to build a language. I would sit down and say the first priority here is that our programmers are going to want to build sort of data structures that they hand fill in the data for, and then they're going to want to be able to run some code that uses those data structures. Now, that sounds a bit weird, but here's why I say that. Whenever I do something like this, right, where I'm generating the 2 to the 3 different combinations of my string procedure based on all the ways that the arguments might be ordered. Well, you can see that what I really did was I specified that I had like these 2 different concepts of a type, like this type and this type, and then I made a kind of, not really an array of those types, but it kind of is an iteratable structure. And the only reason it's not an array is because these little tidbits about how do you generate a procedure of, or a parameter of this type, how do you generate a parameter of this type, they're just switched down here. I could easily start making this more sophisticated by saying that there's like a struct param type, and then that would have like a print parameter and down here we'd have a get size. Those are the 2 things it has to switch on. So print parameter and get size. And then what I would do is I would take these strings out and say like, alright, so the way you print a parameter for this type is this, and so on. And you can see how I could easily transform this code into an array instead of this, right? And then that's actually what you would prefer to have, I think, than what I have right now, except that the language makes it hard to specify data without it becoming unwieldy. A part of it's also your editor. You want to be able to cross-reference things that are far away from each other, because there's no way to build a language where all related things are next to each other, because it's like one-dimensional. If you have a one-dimensional thing, it's maybe slightly two-dimensional. If you make it like a table or something, you put a lot of work into building a two-dimensional thing, but that's it. And so if you're ever in a situation, it's mostly one-dimensional, which means if you're ever in a situation where this thing X relates to like 5 different things, like it's maybe X is a constant, and you have a set of constants that all tune how an algorithm runs. And so in one sense it's related to all of those constants. In another sense it's only related to one little snippet of about 6 lines of how that algorithm runs. And so you could sort that with this 6 lines, and there's other constants could go with the 6 lines they are a part of. And now you have this question, do I put all the constants together at the top so that I can tune them as a block, or do I put them in the code where they relate to that code, so that when I'm editing that code I can see how like the constant and the code relate to each other? And the problem is you can spend all day, you know, doing all kinds of thinking about this and that and trade-offs and whatever. You can never solve that problem because we don't use languages that are non-linear, and we maybe don't want to use languages that are non-linear, but we need some way to deal with that cross-reference problem. But setting that part aside, which is maybe a tooling problem and not a language problem, the other big problem that I see, that's got to do with how you slice your code, basically. How I say, I'm interested in this concept, and then how do you bring up everything related to that concept, no matter what concept you mentioned, right? We're pretty primitive on how we handle that problem. But the other thing is, a lot of problems can be converted to, I start with some core data and I convert it, and a lot of times what the programmer wants to do is just specify maybe a small amount of that core data, and then an algorithm that does it, because it's so much easier to write, instead of writing this all 8 combinations of this, knowing fully well that at some point I'm probably going to want to run this code again with another combo type in here that's like C put or len, right? Which is another thing where I take a C putter and a length separately just because it's convenient to not have to wrap them up into my string struct, right? If I had just written that all by hand, then I wouldn't have this code sitting around that makes it easy to make that kind of change, obviously. I also, like if I had done this even closer to the way where it's just a data format instead of kind of I'm sort of implicitly making a data format by the switches, but it's a little bit procedural. But the more you do stuff like that, the more you have the ability to like make I don't know, just efficiency gains in terms of like, I want this high level thing, this rule that I can follow that tells me which procedures are available, without me having to handwrite all, you know, combinations of them or whatever. Now, I mean, that's when you do generative code, but doing a thing that enumerates the cases versus like being able to specify some, if you can turn it into a procedure, right, then that works on data rather than a procedure that just shits stuff out, this is just a procedure that shits stuff out. If I moved it to the point where it took in some input data and printed out the output data, then expanding it to have this C put or len is easier. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? The way it is now, I have to go and change these switches and things, whereas if I had made it a data format, it would have been even easier to add in more parameter types in that list. And in general, when you can make something that's like, this is a procedure that takes in some data that specifies some kind of, that in some way specifies user's intent and generates data of another type, right, like the text of the actual code, then I can control the text of the actual code by changing the input in a lot of expressive ways. I might not be able to get all features out of it that way that I ever want, but it gives you a lot of leverage that you don't have when you're dealing with code, because code is just, all code is the most complex possible data format. Turing complete data is just, it's just the description of a Turing machine is a format of data that is more complicated than any other type, and often being able to like say like, no, this is like a declarative thing that I can just say here are the things and I have a procedure that generates stuff from that data, is a lot, you get a lot more leverage out of it, in my opinion. And so the basis of this language would be the ability to specify arbitrarily complex sort of arrays inside of arrays of things. So one thing that you'll get into if you start trying to use my method that I'm describing here is, suppose you had like you had some notion of a type that isn't a struct, but maybe it's like there's a number of different structs that all are related to each other. So let me give you an example of this first. Suppose I have a foo, and my foo is like this, right? Right? Whatever. And then I want to be able to have that foo like this as I have it, but I also want to have like foo pointers. And I have that, I have that, and I have that. And you'll notice this isn't a pointer, but that's because maybe in this case the string kind of already acts as a pointer, and so we have a different sort of reasoning about how we think of strings when they're referential versus direct, and it doesn't actually involve putting a pointer on them or whatever, right? And maybe foo isn't the only struct of this type that I have. Maybe I have another one, right? Maybe I have bar2, that is similar, but it's like old name, new name, conversion time, whatever, right? And then I want to be able to get my bar pointers. You get the idea. I can stop doing this. But the point is, you have these things that are kind of like types, but you want more from them than just this. You want to be able to say, well, give me the pointers version. You maybe also want to be able to automatically say, here's a procedure that serializes and deserializes this, or whatever it is, right? So the problem is, in C, for instance, you can specify a struct like this, but this isn't really data. What you would want is a language where everything is data. And so, I mean, if you took, for instance, Lisp, the idea might be something like, okay, this is a struct called foo, right? And we'll just use a very Lisp-like approach to this. We have an int32 called x, we have an int32 called y, we have a string called name, right? So, from the Lisp perspective, this is like an array, right, or a list of things, and in there I have this the name struct, the name foo, and another array, and that array contains the name, or three more arrays, and those are int32 and x, int32 and y, and string name. That's just some data. And then maybe somewhere in my code I can say, like, use a foo as a thing here, right? Foo, whatever. Now, obviously Lisp doesn't actually work this way, but the point is, now I can treat this as both data and something else, right? And it's in the same data format specification that the whole language is in. So there's obviously downsides to Lisp itself, but something like that is, I think, where I would want to see things go. So instead of having a specialized like meaning that a struct is like it's a magical thing outside of what everything else is, a struct would actually be like a second-class citizen, and data would be the first-class citizen everywhere, I guess is what I'm saying, right? So you would have some data specification that you can use to specify any kind of setup, and then there are special forms of that when you specify data in specific formats that it can then be recognized as a struct or as executable code. And the reason for that is because I think data should be the first-class citizen for the reasons I was talking about earlier. Hopefully that makes sense. But as I was saying, what can go wrong? Suppose we have this thing of a type, and our type is going to be like, okay, well, we have like type member, members, and account, right? And maybe a name. Maybe we'll do it this way, name, right? All right, and then, you know, type member, we'll give it like, trying to do this in C, it would be something like we'd give it type and name, and then we'd have like our enum of like base type, right? Whatever, integer, and so on. And those would be the things that fill in this. And then what you would do is you'd say, alright, so now what I'm going to want is I'm going to want an array of types. So here are the types that I am interested in. And let's see, what types am I interested in? Well, I have a foo. And let's see, my foo has the following members. It has a base type integer called x, and a base type integer called y, and a base type string called name. And then I also have to mark this up with the number of parameters I have. That's a little bit annoying, but fine, we'll do that right there. I mean, ideally what I could do is I could go like array count of this dot members or whatever, right? But I mean, that's just so far afield from anything that C or C++ offers, so just type in the 3, whatever, right? But this doesn't actually work because I'm already making an array here. This won't parse into like a local array, at least not in C++. Maybe this fancy C stuff can do it now. But it won't accept that as an array of pointers to members. Right? And so it makes it very hard in C to be like, alright, I'm going to switch to specifying all of my structs this way. because you just what are you going to do? How are you ever going to specify them in a way that, I mean, even this is verbose and it doesn't even work. This isn't even close to how much work you actually have to put in to make it work. So if I finish putting in bar here, what did bar have? It had like old name, new name, conversion time, right? So there we go. I've respecified those as data in C, except that won't parse. So what do I actually have to do? Well, what I actually have to do is I have to come up here and go, okay, well, let's give this foo members like that, and then that can go there, and then foo members can go here. This will parse. But you can start to see that now we're getting back to that locality problem where C does such a poor job of letting me reorganize things however I want to put them near each other. Now, maybe I could just make C work with an editor that knows how to fix these locality problems magically by displaying things out of order, but why not just ask for a better language that prioritizes data specification as its first design principle, right? Because then what you could do is you could say, alright, I've specified all of the structures in my entire program as this type structure thing, and I'm just going to say, give me a list of all the types I've specified, and instantiate them as C structs now as I transition to compiling this into, like, code, right? Or whatever. You know, there's just... I mean, in a real language that was based on this, you wouldn't have to do that, because they would automatically be picked up. But, like... in C, there's so much work you have to do to get all of these things to have this kind of flexibility the way I would like them. And there's other things you can do. You can use macros. So one thing I've worked out before is you can do like a XList style thing to make this work. So if you do like type list M, and then in M you go like foo, and then you go yeah, then you go ahead and put in like all of your members. So this could go like integer x. That would have to go like this. Base type integer x. Base type. But we'll just leave that at 0. So we'll have like a base type none, base type integer, and so on, right? String. And then we can specify our types like this, right? And then we can do some X macro stuff to get that to generate the arrays I was talking about before. But now look at this. This is not actually that much better. It fixes the locality problem, but the syntax is completely busted now. So yeah. So anyway, how so? So Gary Johansson says, I haven't been reading all of his comments, but we've basically been going, he's been giving feedback on my explanation of language. What do you mean by C code layout tool, though? Stream to do. Right. Right. So what we're doing here is seeing, okay, we still got a parse back, and we want to see if, yeah, we have one error now. And that one error is right here. So yeah, besides not getting besides not getting a name parameter properly, it did in fact manage to get everything else, and probably didn't get the treat as code thing correctly either, which is fine. Okay. So that's cool. It at least shows that the error recovery is working. Now we want to get the error printing to work. So the way that has to happen is, let's go to config parser, config parse data. There it is. Okay. So when we do that, we get back the parsed. I'm gonna just have a thing that does the printout of all of the errors. As a C code layout tool, that could be fantastic, as opposed to its own language. I still don't know what you mean. What are we talking about? That could be a code layout tool. And now what we want to do is we want to look at yeah, actually, so config error position string file name. Oh, are you saying like a thing that's like you specify some data and then have a preprocessor that parses that and spits out C code so that it automatically generates like the complicated array stuff? Because I've thought about building that thing. I've definitely thought about building that thing. Yeah. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I've thought about it a little bit, but explicitly saying it out loud is kind of interesting. I mean, it would let you get all the data specification done, and you could, in theory, have it. I mean, it'd basically be just compiling to C at a certain level of depth into this, but you could have a thing that's like, alright, if I recognize a specific data format, not only do I print out the array, but I also print out the struct, right? In fact, a Lisp to C compiler would be kind of interesting, like a C Lisp as like a first step at figuring out how to do this. I don't love Lisp. I feel like the data format specifier needs to be a little bit better than that. The advantage to Lisp is that it's like so clean and pure and perfect, except practically speaking it's got a lot of problems. You don't want to actually write all your code that way. And so it raises the question, what exactly is the raw format that you want that code can be easily expressed within? Such that it looks nice to read the code in the raw format and also is easy to reason about what it means as data if you think about it. Like, the nice thing about the Lisp setup is that it's very clearly set up as data, and then you can flip a switch in your brain and think about it as code if you want. C code is very clearly not organized as data, and that's not only true because of the format, but it also doesn't even, you can't even treat it as data. It doesn't let you. So it would have to be something a little bit in between or something. I'm not sure. It's worth thinking about. If I knew how to solve that part, I'd probably start it as a side project for funsies. But I might just do Lisp to see now that I think about this, thinking about this more. The only thing about that is it's not typed, so I might not want to do it that way either. Maybe something more like JSON, but that still isn't typed. So now the question I want to think about is, how do I want to actually go about doing this part? So right now the problem is this config parse data is pure in the sense that it doesn't take in the app pointer, it just operates on an input data and output data principle, right? It takes in the file name and the data in that file, and it parses all that and fills a config struct, which you pass it a pointer to for it to fill. And there's no actual setting of any settings, there's no anything like that. But now, if I want to report errors directly, do I want to do that in here? I don't think so. I want to have a nice pure way to say, give me the data without doing anything else. And that's what this does. So I want an outside layer that actually says, okay, then print errors here, right? But then that means that this can't be a scratch arena anymore. That's what that means. Which means that we now have to return the config thing at the end. Goodbye. 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 Okay. Jeez. Okay. So yeah. So this lets us do all those things. Now, where do I actually use these config parse things? I forget. So I could use somewhere else down here. Load config and apply. Okay. Yeah, this is the one I want. So whenever we are going to apply that, yeah, we're going to take the parse data, and this is where we're going to string eyes and print it all. So we'll just do this as error text equals config string eyes errors scratch parsed, and then we can do print message onto the app pointer error text dot string error text dot size. Yeah. Alright, so for this what we want to do is we're going to need an arena. Cool. Get that at the beginning of the arena. Result.size is going to equal the end of the string minus the base of the string. And the memory size is just going to equal the size. Yeah, you can't really, the macro system in C doesn't really do it either. What you really want is just I mean, this is why I say it's a data specification problem, because if you start with that as your first class, if you start with like we're going to do code things, then your mental model always ends up in a position where a sort of infinite recursion structure feels wrong. Like a macro defining a macro feels a bit weird, but that's partly because of the way the preprocessor works. But like procedures can't really define procedures either. And you know, you can't really use the format of a struct to do things that are only semi-related to that in any way other than the way it's laid out. Like, yeah, there's no matter how you set up when you're taking code as the primary goal of your language, you actually end up in a nasty situation where you aren't making the decisions in a way where you can get the self sort of like a language that has a dialogue within itself about itself, which you can get much more easily when you start with a data specification, I think. Now, like JAI is kind of trying to do that, and I'd be curious when I'm a few years away from having started using it and see if I think that I was wrong. But I think JAI would the metaprogramming stuff would make even more sense. I don't know. It's sort of acting in a very different way from the way I imagined that a metaprogramming-centric language would act, but it could still be a good idea, who knows. There's no reason to think it won't be at least way better than C. I'm sitting here thinking about it still. Like, what would the exact format be? I haven't... Whoops, what did I just do?
What am I switching?
No. Alright, anyway, so we are going to build this... We're going to stringize these errors. That's what we're going to do. So we're going to take a config error. All that is non-zero. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have to push a few things on to the string. So we're going to append onto result the file name that's inside the error. So I just put it there. We're going to append onto the result a line number, column number, a colon in between each of those, and a space after that colon, and then we're going to append the error's text, and finally we will append a new line character. So that's how we build up this string. Alright. So now the only problem is, where are we getting these line number and column numbers? Well, there's an easy way to do that, which we're going to do for now, which goes like this. Now, a smarter version would be O of n time instead of like O of n by m time, but we're doing n times m time for now. N for the length of the file, m for the number of errors. The smart thing would be to iterate both together, so that you're at an error and you keep on parsing forward until you find that position, and then you know the line and column for that position. And then you parse forward some more, and then so on. But this is just going to do, here's a position, start from the beginning, find it. Here's a position, start from the beginning, find it. Why? Because it's easier to write that without any errors, and so that's where we're starting. Plus, when this thing is really done, it will not even need to do the fast version. It'll do the super fast version, because the file will be loaded by 4coder, not by a file handle. And when the file is loaded by the 4coder internals, it'll do the meta generation stuff to mark it up anyway, so then I can immediately get file details like line number and column number using the coordinate conversion system, which would be even faster. There we go. Now the only problem is that this parsed thing won't actually have the original data in it. I feel like that's just worth fixing. No need to get any fancier about that. We'll just go ahead and say that the raw data is inside the parsed config. Go. Config data equals context data. ZerkBTW asks, what are you making? I am working on the parser for the config system for 4coder. Particularly, I'm adding in error reporting so that you can jump to the line where an error occurred in your config file. Right, let's call it partition. Still gotta upgrade to the new engine where I can fix my naming scheme on stupid shit. Oop. First error, please. Location dot line number column number. There we go. So now when I do this, doop, did I get anything printed? No, I didn't. Interesting. Alright, so let's go and check that out. Default hooks. No, config.cpp. Load config and apply. Oops. Alright, so we get the parse data. We've got one error. We stringize the text. Ah, that's weird. It came back zeros. Error location. Okay. I append all of that onto the result. Oh, the result has a memory size of 0. Right. What's in use by another process? What are you even talking about? Weird. Why didn't I see that come out? That's weird, right? I just saw everything else happen. Print message. Length of 0, huh? Why is that coming back with a length of 0? I mean, it clearly pushed the right string on there. Let's take a look. Oh, I did it backwards. Yeah, I'm not pushing onto the arena. So I'm pushing onto the string and then I'm moving that change back to the arena. Right. I'm basically checking that out. Okay. Is there some... I don't know if there is a list of handmade project ideas anywhere. I mean, I have my list of project ideas. I wouldn't know... I don't know if there's like a global list of project ideas. That'd be kind of a fun thread to have sitting around, wouldn't it? I mean, Handmade Network is a list of existing projects, and you can probably browse around for it, but... project ideas, I don't think we have something like that. Oops, I missed the first colon. Interesting. Still won't let me jump to it. Oh, because I'm not using a full file name there, am I? So I gotta get a full file name in, but I can at least now see where the error is, which means if I went over here, I could jump to it, right? It says, expected semicolon for assignment. Now, I want to do a few other things to test out that the that this is doing everything correctly. So, if that one was failing, okay. Suppose that it was failing right here. We're still getting consolata, but if I go over here... Uh-oh, that still doesn't work, huh? I feel like username should have worked that time. I should have gotten name. Where exactly is this am I editing the wrong freaking config file? Oh, this is the right one. Just double check. Yeah, okay. So that's not coming through, which means something's weird. Jim has a question about how the 4coder custom DLL thing works. Give me a minute, I will go find out, because I can't remember. It's probably under System Share or Platform All. Load custom code. Yeah, so first it tries your current directory, then it tries the binary path. The way to get around that, if you want it to always use the binary path, I believe there's a flag for it. Let me read this. Locations. Ah, here it is. Right, it's plat settings, custom DLL. Right, so you can set the you can set, okay, yeah, use -D flag, and it will set that for you. So it'd be like C/full path to 4coder binary /4coder what is it? 4coder custom DLL. So that's one option. Is if you do that, then it will only use this DLL. It won't go loading anything else. Short of that, I can't exactly say what else you could do. I could reorder these to try binary first, but I feel like, yeah, maybe I don't want it doing this. I don't know. So, Dan Golf, I guess I could recommend some stuff maybe. I could think about it. I know that we've had conversations like that before around the Handmade Network and stuff about like things people wanna work on. Problem is, I don't know, you kind of have to find out for yourself what really you find interesting. Like, yeah, it's not good enough to just have like, here's a project that nobody's working on, because I can name almost any project that nobody's working on, and even though I think it's super cool, I wouldn't really care to put too much time into it. Yeah, Jim. So Jim asks, have you looked into hot reloading the 4coder custom DLL? I have. It's kind of in the works. So there's a number of things that make that very hard. The first one was the way the binding system works, which got changed back in 4coder November, so that now the bindings can be blown away and reinstantiated. And since that is possible now, it's also possible to conceive of editing your DLL, closing it, like rebuilding it, then unloading the one you have, blowing away your custom, like seeing that you have a new, basically the process for the 4coder. I'm mixing the user's process with the editor, the code's process. The code's process would be observe that there's a new library, blow away the old bindings, unload the old library, load a new library, reinstantiate the bindings, and then you'd be kind of there, except that the libraries also tend to rely very heavily on global data, which means you'd basically want to do a full shutdown and reinit of everything except for the buffers, right? And then you would be able to at least keep your buffer list the same, but everything else would basically end up having to shut down. Like views would need to be reinstantiated back to their original setup. Everything, like all of everything except for the buffers would need to be blown away and reloaded. And that could still be pretty handy because, hey, then at least you got your buffer list, right? Redo and undo is attached to the buffer, so that would not be lost. The things that would be lost would be like, if you had a project loaded, that would be gone. Your history, your clipboard history would have to be, well, your clipboard history actually wouldn't need to be blown away because that's not stored by the custom side right now. If it was ever stored on the custom side, it would need to be blown away. Basically, anything that the custom side is required to handle. So, like, it would lose. If you had any parsed like jump buffers, they would all be lost. In fact, they would be leaked, which might be worse. Unless I did some changes to. Basically, the unload doesn't exist right now. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff like that literally I have no idea how I could possibly fix them, except to say stop using global variables. And even then, it's not clear that you'd only get hot reloading up to the point that you don't change your data formats at all. Anyway, let's get back to the task at hand. But the cool thing is hot reloading would at very least for changing your commands, if you don't mind reloading the general state, like having your views reset. It would mostly be possible. Yeah, reloading the project, you would lose your a few arbitrary command history things that are custom side and blah 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 blah. And you'd lose like your position in a lot of buffers and stuff. Although that could actually be recovered if you built it into your custom system correctly. Anyway, point is, why do I not get a username there? I should be getting a username, but I'm not. So why not? Let's go to config. Alright. We're just going to go in here and we're going to look at the actual parse, because clearly something is going wrong in the parse. That seems like the most likely explanation anyway. I suppose it could be something wrong after the parse, but I don't think so. Alright, so we want a little bit of help seeing the location that we are at in the parse. So there we go. Grabs a mapping, enable code wrapping, automatically adjust wrapping, default, automatically indent, saves on default theme name. There, got an assignment. Here it's going to fail. So let's go in there. It grabs an L value successfully. It fails to get an equal sign and it emits such an error, and then it parses ahead to there. So we're at username now. It returns 0. Doesn't do anything with that, and then it comes in here, parses out the L, parses out the equals, parses out the R, parses out the semicolon, creates an assignment, and that assignment does in fact get pushed on, so that actually is not failing. It's coming out as a string. Okay. So we get to the end here. Let's go then, because apparently that wasn't failing, so we're going to look now at this. Why is this failing? So we're looking for username. At each step, please show me what's in the L. Looking for username 0 in particular. We get mapping 0, enable code wrapping 0, automatically adjust wrapping 0, default wrap width, default min base width, automatically indent text on save, automatically save changes on build, default theme name, username. Okay. Index equals 0. Alright. Okay, so we're returning that assignment, which does contain the right string. Evaluate the R value. What type are we looking for? A 4. Is that a string? Yes. Did we get a string? Yes. So out gets filled like that. And now, okay, so that gets filled, and that, alright, so that's now a string struct pointed to a thing that called name. Weird, so why does this one say for, oh shit, I see what's gone wrong. I'm pulling out the original string there, and what I really want to do is make like a placed string. Yeah, okay. Alright. Um, 876. Alright. Alright. So we need a new version of this that's the config placed string var, config var name, subscript var out, space and space size. right? And so the way that'll work is we'll go config var name subscript, and then we're going to put in like a little local string thing here just to get that thing out. And then if that succeeded, we will then do var out equals make string cap space 0 space size. We'll do that either way, actually. And then we will copy into var out from the string. Let's see, config var name subscript out and then array, and those will go into replace string var c v s CVS, O, and then A, and then size of A. There we go. So that just lets us use fixed width arrays and automatically pulls the size out for us. Let's take a look at the theme parse real quick, as it might also make this mistake. Yes, it does. So still no good. Okay. Why not? Why are we not getting that? Okay. So if I look here, okay, I know where this is going. I know where this is going. Right? Right? Okay. So here's the config. No, that's just coming right out of the global config, so that should be set correctly. We print an error message, we do some of these things. Alright, global config says, ooh, size of 0 though. Well, that's the problem, but why is that happening? And when did that happen? I didn't notice that before. Alright, so we're coming through here to get username. come in here. Oh, screw you. We come in here. Ah, gotta re-indent this shit. And, let's see, what do? We grab a string, and we pull that out. So now we know that that's got a length of 4. The var out here, okay, and we copy into there from there. So now the var out has the length of 4. Length of 4. So yeah, username right now has a length of 4. Did that get trampled yet? Nope. Is it trampled yet? Nope. Wait, not success. Oh shit. $9.55. Okay. Alright, I'm gonna wrap this stream up for the day. But we basically got the stream to do done, I think. We're going to test it in just a second here, but I think we got through what I thought we would get through today, which is very good. Very good. There we go. That is back to working, and we still get this error here for that point right there. Awesome. Awesome. Alright, let's do a few more tests, just to be sure. So we've tested what happens when that doesn't show up. What happens when I put this in? I don't need to rebuild. Well, I don't really have a very specific language idea. I've kind of given you as specific as my brain gets about it right now. I mean, what I could do, and what I probably will do sometime soon, once we get some of this other stuff done, is I'm going to add a few features to 4coder to help me with my style of metaprogramming, and I might, since I'm probably going to do that on stream, you'll probably get to see my most recent version of metaprogramming, and while I'm doing that, you would probably get a good idea of what my language idea looks like. Consolata, not liberation mono, and oops, expected an L value identifier, or identifier with a little thing you do. Alright, let's try that. What if I do this? What do I get? Don't build! Oh my gosh, stop rebuilding. So now I'm not getting an error, and that's coming through okay. What went wrong here? Whew. I don't know what that is, but that's messed up. Huh. Okay. What? Okay, let's take a look at that. So, theme. Create theme. Okay, it's the first thing we create, I suspect. Oh shit. So I want to get rid of that and put that there. Okay. Alright, cool. Alright, that looks good. And that part worked. So the only other thing we could do is let me mess with my project file a little bit, because the project files have been upgraded a little bit already. So for one thing, this now actually has to go down here, because now the way it works is it'll take the first thing instead of the last thing. That matches the query, but I can also do this now, so I can go, you know, I don't even remember the original order these things came in. Okay. Dot footer. What was it? Project commands footer panel. Yeah, dot footer panel equals. I can put that on these now. I don't need to do that. What I could do instead is say, alright, here's how I build x86 Win32 equals that, and this can actually go right here if everything is working correctly, which means that these all actually will line up just fine. And the second one here is the save dirty files option. This is nice because I always forget which order these things come in, so not having them come in order anymore will be nice. Build X. It also means I can pull these longer strings out like this. Linux equals build x86 Linux. Build x86 Mac. It looks like it's literally going to be the same thing as the Linux one, but I'll keep them separate. Alright, so that's nice. Let's finish getting these all cleared up. Cool. Yeah. Yep. That's neat. So let me see if this actually compiles or like parses entirely. I didn't need to build again. Darn it. Alright, we'll find out. Load project. Try that again. No need for breakpoints, please. Ah, didn't work. Okay. So let's go back in there and take a look at the project stuff now. Load project. Okay, we got a good extension list. We're opening recursively. Yeah, this looks like everything is going as it should. Let's take a quick look at the F key commands here. Yeah, so like this one, for instance, has the build for x86 Windows stuff right there. You can see it. Save dirty files doesn't look like it has been set correctly. Alright, so we didn't get save dirty files quite right, but everything else is good. Now we go to set the current project. I don't get it. Why is that not, oh, I took a pointer to it. Okay. Okay. So we need to clean that up a little bit. It's a little bit messed up. 276. Alright, but that won't be enough because if I look over here at the project, I also have to redo the current project. Dir wants to look at the current project.dir space. Not sure why there's even a dir pointer, why that's not just its own space or whatever. Besides that, that should be good. Okay. There, perfect. So, there we go. Yeah. Let's add a parse error to that real quick. So let's suppose it's going along and it finds that I've accidentally done this. I didn't need to rebuild, darn it. So you can see that has all come through correctly. I didn't get a build error over here, but that's just because in order to get a build error, I have to actually explicitly ask for that in the main part. So let's finish up with that part. Config.cpp. parse file name. Config pointer, this is an arena, and we don't blow it out when we're done. Config pointer, whoops, parsed. These need to be arenas now, not temps. Or scratches, I mean to say. And they can't be temped. They have to be arenas. Okay. But then this guy can still be an arena that is temped. We're just going to go ahead and go config string eyes errors, config scratch config, print message to the app, error text dot string, error text dot size. There we go. Well, project still doesn't do this, you dip. Okay. Alright. One last time. Project commands. Set current project. Yeah, it's usually this one where I would do that, but now I'm passing that in there. Oh, so the only way I could make that work is if I also passed in the config that created it. Okay. There we go. Now we should be able to see an error when I load the project. Alright, project. Why didn't we load the project 4coder? Well, I'll take a look at that in a second. Line 22. Yep, alright, perfect. Now, let's take a look at why didn't it load the project. When that happens, that usually has something to do with holding a file handle open for too long. So I'm doing a dump here, which means that the handle shouldn't be staying open. Maybe I misimplemented this? Oh yeah, it closes the file right there. Hold on a minute. Yeah, so it includes that 4coder in the list. Open all files and directory with extension. And let's see, neither that nor that. Parse project nearest file. Okay, we're gonna have to take a closer look, but that's not a big deal. Let's take from here. Yeah, this has become a long stream, hasn't it? I usually keep them under like 2 hours, but this one's going for 3, but oh well, that's what we're doing today. So, we're now going to open all files in directory with extension. Now let me take a look at that extension array first. Okay, well there's definitely a problem there. Default extensions. Oh, the project isn't marked as loaded. Lame. Okay, Alright, so now that's getting loaded with everything else. And, yeah, it looks like everything still works normally. Yep. Cool. Alright, so that's it. That's everything we wanted to get done so far. Error reporting and parse recovery are done, which means next time I work on this, which probably won't be on stream, but I will get to finally start working on project file upgrades very soon now. Thanks for following along, folks. See you guys later.